Hi, and welcome to another episode of You Haven't Seen What? A married couple's quest to rectify the wrongs of their partner never seeing culturally relevant movies. Hi, I'm Joelle.
And I'm Perry.
And this is the Crime Files edition of You Haven't Seen What?
We still don't have special music for that. So.
Dun, dun, dun. No, that doesn't work.
Dun, 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 dun.
What?
I think it works.
Okay.
That's the other half of that.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Should I do it all over again?
No, I think that works.
I think we're fine. Okay, good. So yeah, for those of you who are now just joining the fray, welcome to you, you crime movie buff makers, doers, watchers, thinkers.
Fans in general.
There you go. Thank you. It's going to be a long episode.
We're going down the spiral there.
Oh, man. It's all downhill from here. It's what happens when you go out late one night and get home by 12. All of a sudden in your 40s, you're like, I need like 3 days to recover.
But a set by Margaret Cho was worth it.
I had 2 beers and I need 3 days to recover. So bad. Such a lightweight. But yeah, so welcome to all of you crime movie fans and to all of our awesome ass listeners. Well, guess what? Bonus for freaking you that we're dropping a ridiculous amount of episodes in one day so you can binge listen to our crazy married life in one day if you really wanted to.
Our crazy married crime-filled life because of Joelle's criminal justice PhD.
Right. That thing. that thing that's finishing eventually one day.
By the time we drop these
it should be pretty much turned in. So I mean, I think only the rough draft and the defense might be left, hopefully. Let's just cross all the fingers for everything now.
This is assuming that Homeland Security hasn't come to take us away because of your Amazon order list over the years of books on terrorism and crime.
Listen, I had classes, and if they haven't, I've written papers, and if they haven't done it yet, I don't think they're going to. So yay for my friends working at the NSA.
Yeah, because you're on a watch list for sure.
Keeping me off the damn watch list. So anyway, yeah, this is corresponding to our crime movie database, which should also be releasing on the same day as all of this is releasing. So check out youhaven'tseenwhat.com for information about that.
You haven't seen what movie?
Movie.com. Yeah, geez, thanks. And yeah, let's just get into it. So today's movie is Runaway Jury.
Not to be confused as a sequel with Runaway Bride.
That was a bad joke.
Yeah, pretty
already
bad.
From I can't even laugh at it.
We started down.
We started already bad. Boom.
Editable moment.
Epic fail. Already. So yeah, Runaway Jury. I've seen this movie a bunch of times because it has one of my favorite actors, no judgment, John Cusack in it.
AKA Lloyd Dobler.
I mean, I don't really see. Here's the thing: I don't associate him with Lloyd Dobler.
Or how about Lane Meyer?
I associate with him.
Mumpishness.
I guess I associate him with Lane Meyer more than I associate him with Lloyd Dobler. So I don't know what that means. If you don't know who I'm referring right now, yes, you should Google it and then you should watch that said movie. But so for our crime movies, it's a little bit different. It's a similar pattern that we're going to do for our podcast, but we just have a little bit of a different spin on it, where we just kind of sort in, what real life things these movies have an influence on. So kind of looking at the social construction of how we view crime as a society and what these movies help to portray or help to embellish or help to actually build the world in which we frame the criminal justice system. So just taking a look at all of those things and how they interconnect with each other. So I'll give you a really easy example. When the TV show CSI came out, all of a sudden we began to get, not all of a sudden, but eventually we began to get this thing called the CSI effect, which essentially was that juries wanted more forensic evidence so than they were getting previously. And the CSI effect was pretty much, if you didn't have all of these components within your case, from a prosecutor standpoint, you were sort of stuck because the juries now expected this because this TV show had shown that this had happened. Other references can be sort of the cop buddy drama that you see in Beverly Hills Cop or in Training Day, or other pieces, and how they really relate to how we view police officers or law enforcement in general. So that's sort of giving you an idea. So Runaway Jury.
The defense has retained Rankin Fitch as their lead jury consultant.
Trials are too important to be left up to juries. 30 years in the trenches have taught me this. Everybody has a secret they don't want you to find. Find something on every one of them. In court, somebody always loses, just not me.
Next is Nicholas Easter, 34 years old, part-time student.
We accept this juror.
$20 million ought to be enough to secure a jury.
They're using video surveillance, wiretaps, finding out things about jurors their husbands and their wives don't even know.
This is about you messing with my case, and the rules are law. That's what I was hired to do, fella.
Hello, Rankin.
I'd like to know who I'm speaking with.
The fact is the jury's mine, and I can push it either way for a price.
Nick Easter is spinning this jury.
I know you're playing both sides. What's your price?
I can't protect you. I want you to find her. I want you to contain her. You're losing me my jury.
You have him.
We don't have anything yet.
If you don't know, it's based on a John Grisham novel that was released in 1997, I believe. I think that's right.
So this movie came fairly late
96.
in Grisham mania.
So well, I don't know, because Grisham was doing it back to back to back to back, year after year after year.
I mean, in movie terms, it
In
came
movie
late
terms,
in Grisham mania.
It did come late in Grisham mania. But if you were ever a fan of John Grisham or are a fan of John Grisham, this was still, to me, when his writing was extremely solid. Not to say his writing is not extremely solid. I just think it's a little bit more cookie cutter pasted now. But Runaway Jury essentially is about. You want to say something?
I was just going to say that I feel like over time Grisham can become like a James Patterson, and that probably anyone could write the books after a while.
Well, James Patterson, he does have other people write the books.
That's what I'm saying, is that because they're always entertaining, they just may not have as much substance as some of the earlier ones, but they're like good airplane books, and they're always entertaining. And so like a Grisham, they may get thinner and thinner, but they're still always fun in terms of like a good beach novel or plane ride novel.
Sure. I think this just gave a different perspective altogether, this idea or this notion that a jury could really be bought. So I guess that brings me into my synopsis. Look, immediately.
Very nice.
Yep. It's a, so I did a synopsis only because I chose this movie. But really, you should be doing them too. You've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Like eons ago.
Because you showed it to me.
Oh, you've only seen this movie since we've been together?
Yeah, I've only seen this movie twice, and both times were with you.
Oh, so you really didn't see this movie before?
Yeah, unlike you, much as I like John Cusack, I did not make a point of seeing every movie he was in.
I haven't seen every movie that he was in. As a matter of fact, The Sure Thing, I haven't seen ever.
Oh, right.
I know. So I know that's probably going to come up at some point, but...
That's right. Some good Daphne Zuniga, however her name is said, is in there as well.
Okay. So, synopsis, truth, justice, and the American way in Runaway Jury. That includes buying a verdict by buying a jury.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's a pretty consolidated version of what you're going to go ahead and see. That's a lot of what Runaway Jury is about, is this idea of buying a verdict by enticing the jury. And looking at like jury consultants and how that can really sway a jury, or what that really looks like.
Which in this is super high tech, at least for its time, where we have
extremely high tech for its time. I don't even understand. I'm like, really? Google was like sort of just like web, sort of just a thing, not like a real big, huge thing. This came out in 2003, so I guess it was kind of a pretty mainstream thing by then.
Well, and also that was still in the era where we were still kind of fascinated by what you could do with the internet.
That's like MySpace era, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was, it's pre-Facebook.
Yeah.
And it's in that era where we were still a bit fascinated by the web, and we didn't really always know what it really was capable of. You still see that in movies where the internet and computers are used in ways that aren't very realistic. But at this point, they were pushing it a little bit. Not that you couldn't get a lot of the information that they were getting through other routes, but I think they were sort of pushing the envelope a little bit there, straining credibility a bit. But the scene where they are going through everyone's information during the jury selection process is probably, to me, one of the best scenes in the film, because it's well edited, it's fast paced, it's interesting watching the things that they're finding on people and why that would be something you could use against that person, or you would use it to figure out why they would make a good juror who might go in your favor. And so I thought that scene was particularly interesting. But before we get into that, we should probably get into what the main argument in this film is, because, of course, the book was about the tobacco industry, but by the time this movie came out, tobacco had already had its day in court and lost big time,
Well,
and The Informer, the movie The Informer had come out.
Insider.
Insider, sorry, not The Informer, Insider had come out. And so they shifted it.
Right. So we're sort of going into production notes. They were trying to do this movie a little bit earlier. John Grisham had a lot of success in the publishing world, and a lot of his movies were done as movie. Well, a lot of his books were done as movies. So they shifted it. They were going to originally do it as tobacco, and then production issues happened. Then they shifted it, and then they went ahead and kept the shift. So the shift went from tobacco to guns. So the idea that gun manufacturers, they don't know who they're selling to, they don't care, they incentivize, they market they market, and they are selling guns like one argument is definitely the Saturday Night Special, right? Because it's lightweight, compact, easily disposable, or like things where there's not any fingerprint left on the handle of the gun, things like that. So things that would technically be used by people who didn't want to leave their fingerprints on the handle of a gun, if that makes any sense. So it's really taking a look at the gun industry in general, and just, some hijinks that go on in the background at the same time. But in order to really have any of these cases sort of come forward, there always has to be that critical witness or that whistleblower or the memo. It's a lot of digging that you need to sort of go through to find corroborating evidence that they knowingly did something, right? So they weren't just negligent, but they knowingly committed the act, the overt act. And in this case, it was a witness that was supposed to testify to that they knowingly committed this act of negligence.
Right, because the argument that...
Because a mass shooting resulted, right, as a result of the sale of this gun.
Right, but the argument that guns are dangerous and you are liable for any kind of crime that's committed or, harm that comes from your product is the fault of the gun companies wasn't enough. And so it was the idea that there had to be something darker that they were doing, which is...
Well, like an additional layer.
Right.
Like really actual negligence, like actual liability.
Right. Which in this case, someone was selling the guns from the trunk of their car, and it was the idea that they knew that this kind of practice was going on, that criminals were getting...
And they just turned the blind eye to it, essentially.
Right. As opposed to just the idea that you should be held accountable for whatever is done with your product.
Oh, and incentivized it, sort of, right?
Yeah.
Didn't they go ahead and they send people on trips and stuff for selling a certain amount? Mm-hmm. So there was no real wherewithal for the gun shop owner to go ahead and actually do their due diligence either.
Right.
So favorite quote? I mean, I have like 3, but favorite quote of the movie?
Well, there is the very obvious one that sums it up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's the one, I think it was used on like most of the promotional materials for it, which is...
Same one. Go ahead.
But I have some others, but it's the trials are too important to be left to juries.
Yep, Gene Hackman's quote.
Yeah.
I do have one other one because he's so brilliant as Rankin Fitch.
He is. And this movie was not highly quotable. There's not a lot of really lines that really hit you. But of course, someone like a Gene Hackman can make a simple line really, really powerful.
I get it now. You are a moral man living in a world of moral relativity. It's just so quaint, so precious. Hey, don't do that.
What's your other?
Oh, my other
Rankin
quote
line.
from Rankin Fitch, aka Gene Hackman. You think your average juror is King Solomon? No, he's a roofer with a mortgage. He wants to go home and sit in his Barker lounger and let the cable TV wash over him. And this man doesn't give a single solitary droplet of shit about truth, justice, or your American way.
Which is especially great because, of course, he played
It's so freaking true. Let's have that conversation. But yes,
because he played Lex Luthor
Yes.
in the first couple of Superman movies. Three.
So truth,
four,
justice, and American way is literally
Yes.
a callback.
But also, having been called up for jury duty recently,
Both of us.
yes, I can say that in observing the process, which
No one gives a shit. We all want to go home.
that's pretty much what it was, but everyone had reasons, and whether or not they were true, everyone was like, well, I'm the only person at work that does this, and I need to be there for that because it's going to, damage my business if I'm not there for this, or I have to be able to pick up my kids, or I have to take care of my elderly parent. There were all kinds of reasons people had, but there were a number of people who really wanted to be in the trial. They were a little too overeager, or they were completely unemployed or part-time, and they wanted to be there for it, which really got me thinking about...
Like all of my CJ folks would want to be in it.
Yes, they would.
We all would want. Well, I don't really want to. I'm done with that. I already sat on a murder trial.
And you were the foreperson.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm done with that. Done with that.
But it did make me really, really think about the fairness of the justice system at trials, because really who makes up these juries are often the people who either really, really want to be at a trial or who don't have a good enough excuse to get out of it. And so it seemed like a lot of the people who were going to be on the jury for this case I was there for maybe were not the best qualified. And I don't mean that they're dumb. They just didn't really seem to have much of a life going on either way. And we're just kind of going to wind up on this jury is what it felt like.
Well, and that's really where the lawyers come in, right? That's so the jury selection process is called voir dire, and that's really where your jury consultants come in if it's a high profile case. That's where the lawyers really spend an innate amount of time, an insane amount of time really prepping for jury selection, because they know that it essentially does make or break your case. So it's really trying to get at who somebody is in a couple of questions without pissing the entire jury off, without making sure that you've alienated them before the trial really even has a chance to start, making sure, and you see this in this movie, Dustin Hoffman's like, hell no, I'm not wearing a striped tie in New Orleans, like in a New Orleans court. Like, that's craziness. That's a city slicker tie. Like, that's not, I spill mustard on my tie on purpose. Like, I want to be likable. It is very much that sort of, what does the jury perceive of me as an attorney, or my client, just sitting there, not sitting there, engaging, not engaging, right? We hear so many things after a major trial happens about jury's perceptions, but you have to really be talented to pick a jury that is going to sway your way. And that is a tough thing to do, because what people say, what people do, and their body language, and that whole piece is really a challenging and I think very fascinating aspect of our judicial system in general. But it's
There's a lot of psychology involved.
Yeah, and think about it. It's either and you can decide to have a jury, or you can decide to have a judge at your trial. So as a defendant in cases, you can decide what you'd like to have, but 9 times out of 10, you're better off with a jury, and everyone's going to tell you you're better off with a jury. Any lawyer worth a lick is going to tell you you're better off with a jury.
Why? Because judges are known for being harsh, or?
So you just can't, they're not swayed the same way. You know, it's like, it's their job literally to look at the evidence and give it its due weight or not weight. And they're almost too analytical in that aspect.
And they have a hell of a lot more training and experience.
Correct. So why would I want that as a defendant? I don't
Right.
want that. I want somebody who can see me as a person. And judges are generally, that's a very big generalization I'm saying right now, but judges on the whole are really looking at the rule of law and the application and the evidence more than they are looking at you just as a person. There you go. That's a better way to say it.
Right. And you're trying to, I guess, appeal to, what is it they say, the pathos, emotions, logos, facts, and ethos, credibility are the three parts that you're trying to connect to your jury with.
Exactly. But just to go back, like one of the best scenes I think in this entire movie, aside from that whole when all the members are being called up and you're in Gene Hackman's sort of consultant tech sphere, right? Like the old school Bull. It's like literally so Bull is a current TV show.
Which really seems to have been inspired by this film.
Completely inspired by this film about jury consultants. And Dr. Jason Bull is the one who's in charge. I forget that actor's name right now, but he was also on NCIS.
He was for many years.
Exactly. He was DeNozo on NCIS. And wow, that's ridiculous that I remember that. So literally you're in this room with like a bunch of screens, like TV screens sort of happening, which is very reminiscent of what Dr. Bull's office looks like. And so aside from that scene, I think that the best scene is when you're in the taxi with Gene Hackman.
Yeah.
And Gene Hackman has just arrived in New Orleans and he's going to the office, right? It's the start of the trial. So he's already a little peppy, right? A little spirited, we'll say. And the taxi driver's like, oh, first time in New Orleans? Like just making light conversation. And Gene Hackman's like, no, it's not my first time in New Orleans. And he's like, and the taxi driver goes, well, I would have pegged you for a first timer. And you can tell that Gene Hackman takes great offense to this. He's like, you would have pegged me as a first. Like you can almost hear him having this internal conversation. So then he starts to literally analyze the taxi driver. And he's like, oh, your mother, I'm so sorry your mother's not doing well. And proceeds to go ahead and continue with, and I'm sorry your wife is probably having a hard time with this, but you would rather have a happy wife, happy life than have your mother in a nursing home. So you should go that route. He literally takes cues based on what's in the taxi driver's car, whether it was pictures or like a sticker from a hospital that he was just at, like a visitor's pass. And he takes all of these cues and he makes a narrative about the taxi driver that is extremely accurate, right? Because he's good at his job. And he's like, basically, first timer my ass. Like, I know more about you than you know about me. And we'll see who knows more about each other. And that scene was incredible, incredibly arrogant, which is also why I find it incredible.
Well, it's sort of a usual suspects moment, but Gene Hackman very much makes it his own. And nobody can cut someone off at the knees like Gene Hackman.
If you're relying on testimony to win this case, you've already lost it, fella.
And he plays a very similar character in many films, especially in Grisham films, but he's always such a joy to watch, especially when he is at the peak of his confidence in the role and he is just taking someone apart because he can do it like nobody else.
Seriously, it's incredible.
That's who I will watch any movie for. Is
Gene Hackman?
Oh, fuck yeah. Any day of the week.
Nice. Any other memorable scenes that you have in your brain?
I did like, and I have to admit that I did overall find this movie a little plodding. It was a little slow. It's a lot harder to make.
It's like 2 hours.
Yeah, I felt like it's a lot harder to make rigging a jury exciting than some of Grisham's other material, like the racial aspects in A Time to Kill,
right,
or the mob aspects in The Firm. A lot of those things were just more exciting, and not that this idea was bad, because I felt like it was very thought-provoking, but it drew out a little too long. But in the early sections, there was a lot to praise, and I did like how they used, because John Cusack was perfectly cast. He is so unassuming and friendly, but not over friendly, but just extremely likable. He's someone that you want to trust and listen to. And
sorry.
And in all of his roles, you just always get a pleasant feeling from him. And so in this role, he is manipulating the jury. He has gotten onto this sort of unbelievably so, gotten onto the exact trial he wants to get into. And but he has to pretend like he doesn't really want to be there. And so he's joking around at the jury selection, and at one point he tells the judge that he wants to go because he has to get to
he's got to prep for the Madden tournament.
Yes. Which there is a certain irony to that we'll touch on in production notes, but
that's just a coincidence. That's such a coincidence.
I don't know, but the way he is trying to get into the jury by pretending that he doesn't, and the psychology that he's using there and playing the judge, and then the judge goes off on him about his civic duty, and then really pushes for him to be on the jury because of the way he's been behaving. I enjoyed that because Cusack, specifically how he played that part, and also the judge's reaction.
It's Judge Harkin, Bruce McGill.
Yeah, specifically the way Bruce McGill plays the judge as just the hard-ass judge, which is a stereotype in media, but I thought he really pulled it off well, and particularly in that moment when he's admonishing John Cusack. So I thought that scene was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he does authority figure really well, I think.
Yes.
So let's head over to the good, the bad, and the ugly. Awesome. So what's your good?
Well, I will say, even though the way it is portrayed in the film as all gun manufacturers are corrupt and that they are all in cahoots to keep certain legal things from happening. Now, I know that any company that is in question, whether it's gun companies or tobacco companies or ones that want to deny that their product is dangerous in any way, are often doing something shady. But I did like that despite the sort of black and white of it, I did like that they brought that into the conversation. And they could have gone much further with it, and it was a little ham-fisted in places, this conversation, and a little bit too preachy. But I did like that they at least bring up this conversation about both the conversations about rigging juries as well as about guns and what companies should and should not be responsible for in our current culture. Especially because, I was living in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, in Ackworth, Georgia, at the time that day trader shot up his office and killed a number of people and then killed himself in Ackworth. And then I also work just a couple miles from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And so I've been close to and been in the communities that have been deeply affected by this. And of course, the scene at the beginning of the film where we see Dermot Mulroney as is that who it is? Isn't that the actor? Yeah. We see him as the father who is killed in his office. It's very similar, I think, probably based directly on the Atlanta shootings. And that scene was hard to watch. It was hard to see that scene because, again, also because Parkland is only a year old and the organization I work with is connected to working with teachers and education. So those things were difficult. And so anytime that conversation is brought up, even if it's not always done well, at least sometimes it provokes conversation and thought about this subject. So I appreciated that being in there.
Well, I mean, I think I was saving this for production notes, but it actually is so circular. It's unbelievable. So this movie came out in 2003, and coincidence or not, in 2005, there was the Protection of Lawful Commercial Arms Act, so PLCAA, which really protected gun manufacturers from any liability. And then, so now actually the Sandy Hook shooting victims' families is suing Remington Arms, and the court has ruled that because that's a federal law, that doesn't mean that it supersedes entirely state law. So they're going back now, and they have remanded it to a lower court. So we'll see if that trial actually gets heard.
Interesting.
So they're trying to essentially say, okay, that's a federal law, but state law, there's still state law, and state law says, yes, there can be liability. So we'll see how they maneuver through that. But they're essentially trying to hold Remington Arms liable for the Sandy Hook shooting massacre.
Well, and it's one of those examples of we are so deeply entrenched in our media, as you were talking about at the beginning of this episode. And that is an example of where it could have shifted the culture, in that the companies may have seen this and said, well, we definitely don't want something like this to happen. And it's possible. So maybe we need to cut this off at the past. Not that they weren't already, but I wonder if it stepped up their efforts a bit, because it's one of those things that, again, you see something in movies or a TV show that is brought up as a possible, and sometimes the result is to drive people to make a positive change. Sometimes it's to, for people to make a negative change out of fear, whether it's fear of your business or fear for your life. But things portrayed in media definitely affect culture and people's view toward a subject.
Of course, which is why we're doing the Crime Files. So my good was Hoffman and Hackman. Like, I can't. Them together, it's amazing. Especially that bathroom scene, which I know it's a production note that they specifically wrote in for Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman, because they've known each other for so many years.
And they were roommates. They went to school together.
Yeah, but they never worked in the same film together. So this is the first time. And
someone on the crew realized that partway into the film, so they wrote the scene while the film was in production.
Exactly, and had them come back and actually do the scene together. And it's amazing. It's amazing. And they really rehearsed the crap out of the scene.
And it's rumored that after it was shot, Gene Hackman said to Hoffman, all right, let's go get drunk.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's my good. But what's your bad?
My bad is that, I did mention it earlier, is that I feel like they played a little fast and loose with how, Cusack's character of Nicholas Easter has only lived in New Orleans for 6 months. And I believe you have to have lived in a place at least a year to get on jury duty. And also, he's had a number of different names over the years, and I'm not sure how that would affect your getting on. I don't know the deep parts of that, but that felt like it was pushing it a bit. And also, there are so many trials going on in a city at any given time. The chances of you getting jury duty for the exact trial you want to be on, I don't even know what the odds are of that, but I would say that they're pretty tiny, that you're actually going to get on the one you want. And yes, it is a plot device that is meant to be a means to an end. It's just a little thin. Now, if you can suspend your disbelief on that, the payoff at the end for the reason why he and Rachel Weisz's character are doing this is actually pretty interesting. And again, it connects back to, I guess we're known for giving away the end here. We're not spoiler.
So spoiler alert! If you don't want to know, don't listen.
Yeah, we're not spoiler keepers. We're going to give them away here. In the end, it turns out that Cusack and Weisz have been doing this all over the country, trying to get on a jury so that they can get this exact verdict. And they play both sides throughout. And it was an ingenious thing in the film that they're playing both sides, even though they want one specific side to win. They want the gun companies to lose. That is their goal. But it looks like they're just out for the money. So they're sort of blackmailing both sides, which they have to do because both sides are watching each other so closely. And it was a good piece of the plot that I think it was Ebert pointed out, that it wasn't just good versus evil, black versus white. It seemed like they were making Hackman and Hoffman dig down into the depths of their morality, especially for Hoffman, of, is getting the verdict I want, is sacrificing some of my morals better for the greater good in paying them off to get the jury to decide against the gun companies, which he doesn't do, and they end up getting the verdict. But that was a nice piece. But in the end, again, Cusack and Wise want this because they were at a high school where Wise's sister was killed. Her character's sister was killed in a school shooting. And so this is their way of getting revenge upon the gun companies and damaging their business and damaging their the way they sit legally in this country. And so that was a good payoff, I thought. A lot of thin pieces along the way. It's a bit shaky how they get there, but so I think, like I said, my bad was that they stretched credulity quite a bit in a number of places.
That's fair. I mean, that's not fair.
How about you?
My bad. Anytime you have a book into a movie, it just never works out. And I mean, this is not. It's hard because those things you buy in a book because you're reading a book. You know, it's a little bit different seeing it play out on film versus seeing it play out in your head. So it doesn't really ever work out right, book to movie. I know we try so hard, but it doesn't always play out right. You don't have enough time to really give those characters everything that it needs, or the fleshing out, I think. So things just come off as best as they possibly can, but all those other plot pieces really aren't fleshed out as well. So, there's that.
Yeah, and Grisham's novels are often packed with a lot of moving parts that they retool or remove entirely. I remember when I saw The Firm, I was disappointed at a lot of the pieces that were missing from the film. Now, a way that we have in our current media culture has sort of worked a way around that is to have a TV show based on some of these stories where you can fit all of those pieces in. Although something like Game of Thrones still has to edit down because R.R. Martin's works are so incredibly dense. You couldn't have it all in there. But I wonder if you were to make a series out of Runaway Jury or out of The Firm or something like that, now that we're, finally, it took so long in television to get to story arcs. I mean, sci-fi was doing it early on, but story arcs are something that really were not accepted by the Hollywood machine for a long time. But now that they're willing to do these really great season or 2-season or even more long story arcs, I wonder if you could take a Grisham novel and make it into a much more interesting series of episodes.
Well, they sort of did that with An Innocent Man. They took the nonfiction novel that he wrote and they made it into like a mini Netflix documentary, which is probably about like 5 hours long.
Yeah, so, and it's pretty good. Yeah,
it's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's just the tough thing. You're trying to fit in, 300 to 400 pages of a novel into 2 hours, and really display all of that. And I think the best part about reading a book is just envisioning who these people are yourself too. So there's that.
Well, and as one of my my film professors used to be very adamant about, is you cannot compare mediums. They are not the same thing, and they are never going to compare to each other. So don't even attempt to compare them, because you're always going to be disappointed if you start doing that. You have to accept it as a separate work.
Right. Two different things entirely. All right. So what's your ugly?
My ugly, I got a little bored. Now.
Wow. Wow.
Now, we were watching this on a plane at night.
Got bored.
After sitting on the runway for a while. So I was tired, and so we'll factor that in. But
Dang, I got bored.
I did.
Wow.
I got a little bored. About 3/4 of the way in, when it was really supposed to be kicking into being exciting, I was starting, like I said, I'd already been bored by the middle, but I really started dropping off. And it's just the pacing was, I think, a bit poor. And I don't know exactly where the fault is, if that is the director, who was Gary Fletter. And, I've looked through his body of work, and I don't think there's anything in here that I have ever liked. So that may be where some of it falls. I'm sorry. Let's see. Let me
my God.
scroll through a little more here. Let's see if No, and I don't even recognize most of it. But the things that I have seen, I did not really enjoy. So, and it could be that the editing was poor, but it could just be what the editor had to work with. That might have been the problem. It was William Steinkamp. But he has done some good things. Tootsie is one of his, Out of Africa. Scent of a Woman, although Scent of a Woman is pretty long. The Firm, A Time to Kill. So he's worked with a lot of Grisham material. So it might be a combination of the two, really. But I think the pacing was not great.
Wow.
And I think that affected it. Now, admittedly, courtroom dramas can be difficult in terms of keeping that energy up and keeping that excitement going, because trials have exciting moments, but overall they are a long and slow process.
They're arduous. They're definitely arduous. You're really hoping that somebody is helping it flow. So it is arduous. It's not. You're not wrong.
And the scenes where Cusack is getting rid of certain jurors a certain way, or convincing them to work toward the side he wants them to be on, those are interesting. Again, because I like watching Cusack work. Any scene with Hackman, I mean, he's chewing up the scenery as always, but in just the most wonderful way. Although some of Hackman's earlier performances, like The Conversation, are much more understated, and I like them even better. But I'll watch Gene Hackman tear it up any day. And Hoffman he felt a little lost. Some of his scenes they didn't seem to really have any drive to them. And again, I think a lot of these things, some of the issues were with the script, but I feel like the directing and the editing may have been the issue. Although the original director that Grisham really wanted, because he had directed A Time to Kill and I think The Firm, The Client, was Joel Schumacher. And
right.
God knows that man can make a mess of anything. So who knows if that would have been any better.
Well, The Time to Kill and The Client were actually pretty good movies.
Yeah, I actually really liked Time to Kill.
Yeah, so I don't. You are ridiculous.
You know what? I think we said in the Lost Boys episode that Schumacher is just notoriously uneven. You just don't know what you're going to get exactly. And that was a case where he did produce something pretty good. But I also think that the material he was working with was really good in that case. So I think the script on this could have been tighter. I think it just had a little too much. It was a little too loose.
Okay, I don't know.
I didn't dislike it.
I don't disagree with you.
I just probably won't sit down and watch it again, but I don't dislike it.
Oh, I watched it again the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I can watch it again all the time. But it's a very different thing for me. It's called Love of Law, and I am just thoroughly fascinated by jury consultants. And I actually am throwing this back to Professor Lisnick, who is from Loyola, University of Chicago, Loyola. And the deal is that Professor Lisnick, when I was 13 years old, I went to law camp. Wow.
Mm-hmm. There's a great article on the internet about it.
Seriously? Thanks for blowing up my spot. Wow. Yeah, I had my 15 minutes of fame very freaking early in my life. I just wanted to go to law camp because I just wanted to be a lawyer. This is one of the things that I wanted to do. And Professor Lisnick taught jurisprudence at law camp. And he was also a jury consultant back when that wasn't really even a thing. It was, because jury consultants have been around for a very long time, since the 70s, right? But that's just it, is that I thought it was the most amazing thing, like, in life, that he did this and he could persuade a jury and pick the jury that he wanted. So, throwing that out, shout out Paul Lisnick, to his awesomeness, and maybe the reason why I'm still fascinated by jury antics, and probably why I should never be a foreperson of a jury ever again in my life, because it's applied behavior and psychology that you're utilizing in that room sometimes in order to get the verdict that you think is the most just. So you're convincing, your peers to go along with that verdict, or why they should, or what the evidence might be telling them or not telling them. This is also why no one should ever pick me for their jury. There are reasons.
You're just trying to get out of jury duty for your entire life.
There are reasons why you should never pick a CJ student
well,
for
yes, that
your
is true.
jury duty, unless you're the prosecution, technically. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a lot, but that's where my fascination lies. So that's why I could probably watch this movie over and over again. It doesn't really bother me. I think what's difficult, like we have said about other movies that we have watched regarding policies and tendencies, it is a shame, and this is my ugly, and I know it doesn't directly have to do with the film. I'm breaking my own rules right now. But it is a shame that we are still talking about gun violence. It is a shame that we're still talking about mass shootings. It's a shame that we're still talking about assault weapons, semi-assault weapons. It's just a shame that we're still having this conversation about what gun manufacturers are doing, aren't doing, the way that they're marketing, the way that they're advertising, the way that they're selling, the way that they're building guns. It's a shame that we are still talking about this.
Even right down to the fact that
Yeah.
gun shops, often there aren't strict laws around how much they have to protect their stock. What controls and security they have to put in place. There's a great recent New Yorker article about that, about how there aren't as strong laws around the gun shop owners as there should be.
Right. But it's just, yeah. So that's my ugly. That's pretty much where I'm at with all of that. But it's on to other things about this film. Let's do production notes. Hey, with Perry. But first with Joe Holt. Directed by, I'm going to run down, okay? Directed by Gary Fledler. Produced by Gary Fledler, Christopher Mankiewicz, and Arnon Michelin. I'm butchering names right now. Screenplay by Brian Koppelman, David Levin, Rick Cleveland, Matthew Chapman, which also makes me feel like this was done a bunch of rewrites whenever you see 4 screenplays by.
It's usually a problem when you see that many
ton of rewrites. It's probably where you had your disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Based on Runaway Jury by John Grisham, released in 1966. Music by Christopher Young. Cinematography by Robert Elswit. Edited by William Steinkamp and Jeff Williams. Production company was Regency Enterprises. Distributed by 20th Century Fox. Release date October 17th, 2003. Running time 127 whopping minutes. The budget was $60 million. Box office did $80 million. So I think by Grisham novel standards, this wasn't great. IMDb rated it a 7.1. Rotten Tomatoes 73% for critics, 75% audience. And I would say that's probably about right, truthfully. That's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
It's about a 7. What do you think?
About
it being a 7. Oh, really?
No. I think for some of the performances alone, and for the thought-provokingness of the subject matter. I think it's the actual film craft that I have some issues with, more so than with the overall subject and performances in the film.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I think that I took issue with, but
That's fair.
we can give it a 7. Yeah, we'll go there.
All right.
Now, a couple of the producers that you mentioned, I think that they really like this type of maneuvering within what is legal and what isn't, and how much we're willing to accept people who are highly successful doing things that aren't legal, and whether or not we have just come to accept that in our society, because two of these guys, it is Brian Kopelman and David Levin, who worked on this, writers and producers for this. They also were the creators of Billions. So it's,
there you go.
Yeah, similar type. They were a couple of the writers anyway. They weren't the producers you listed, I don't think.
No.
It doesn't concern guns, but it certainly concerns money and all the machinations around how money works in our society.
Interesting.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting. And one of the others, Rick Cleveland, he has produced Claws and The Man in the High Castle, Under the Dome, House of Cards, Scoundrels, Mad Men, 6 Feet Under, West Wing. So he's big time, and he's also been writers for a number of these as well, or a writer for. In fact, I think all of those he was a writer for as well as a producer. So that's pretty impressive credit, and you can see where they're fascinated by that same type of material and exploration into some of this moral ambiguity in our society. So as far as production notes, I'll start light. I thought it was funny, although probably entirely unnecessary, to name the gothy alternate juror Lydia Dietz, as in the character that was played by Winona Ryder and Beetlejuice. Yeah, so it was just a fun little oh, hey, that got my attention. So it was funny, though. Like I said, probably unnecessary. The original casting for Nicholas Easter was Edward Norton.
And then Will Smith.
Yeah. When the project revived, it was Will Smith. And
2001. And then he quit it.
I think Will Smith maybe could have pulled off that likable guy you want to trust. Edward Norton, I don't think so.
You don't?
No. But I've only really liked Ed Norton in a couple of roles. So.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And originally Sean Connery was going to be the Gene Hackman role, which
Fitch, yep.
Yeah, I don't like that. And Gwyneth Paltrow was going to be Marley.
Yeah, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jennifer Connelly, Naomi Watts, Bridget Monahan, Amanda Peet also.
Yeah, and no, I think the casting actually was correct on all the pieces. I think that
I do too.
Yeah. Although strangely, we had Jennifer Beals in here in a role that either wound up on the cutting room floor or was intentionally put in as a red herring that we were going to think she had a bigger role. But she has this teeny tiny little role as a juror and has a total of 4 lines in the whole movie.
Yeah, it's really odd.
Yeah,
but you don't see a lot from all of the jurors. There are just a couple that you really end up honing in on.
Yeah. Now,
there's 12 people. That's hard to do. It would be even longer.
And this movie is a cavalcade of what's their names. Most of the jurors.
What's their names? Damn.
And I don't say that in a negative way. I'm saying it's people who have been in many, many, many roles, but you don't always know their actual name. But you're like, oh, that person, that guy, they were in this or that. And, Leland Orser is in this. And many people remember him as the guy in Seven who they put the knife apparatus around his his parts and make him do the deed with someone that ends up killing them. And but he's been in a million other roles, but that's one he's well known for. Let's see, Gary Beman, who has been again in a ton of things. He's the foreperson in this. Or Bill Nunn, who was in the Spider-Man movies and Do the Right Thing, and just
he played Lonnie in this movie.
right. Nora Dunn, who was the under the table drinker, and she was
Stella.
and she had been on Saturday Night Live for many years throughout the 80s. And then like Rusty Schwimmer, Corey English, who was Lydia Dietz, Peter Jurassic is one of the professors. He's been in a ton of little roles, and not just little. He's been in a ton of roles. And who was the one in here? It was the other lawyer.
Lawyer or consultant?
The lawyer for the defense.
Oh, Shenanigans. I don't have his.
Oh shoot! I had him, and I
had the name.
Yeah, Bruce Davidson.
There you go.
Or Davison.
There you go.
Yeah, Bruce Davison has been in. He has 264 credits in IMDb, and it's one of those appeared in one episode of this show, one episode of that show. So many things, and he's always good. But I think what I always remember him for is X-Men. He was the senator who wanted to persecute the X-Men, and he ends up turning into water because Magneto makes him into a mutant. Let's see, 2000, Senator Kelly. So, but again, many of these people. The only one we really have seen recently in something really big was Cliff Curtis, who was the ex-Marine juror who thinks this is all just ridiculous and why would we even prosecute gun companies, and he's real belligerent and he's the bully and he wants to be the foreperson. He was Travis on Fear the Walking Dead for a number of years here until they killed off his character, and now he's going to be in Avatar 2, 3, 4, and 5. So he's got work up until 2025 guaranteed. So he's he's got that Disney money. So he was like, "See you, Walking Dead. Goodbye to the zombies. I'm heading for Disney cash." So now he's going to be flying around on a banshee with Disney money floating in a cloud behind him. But he is actually from New Zealand. So he has been in a ton of movies there, like Whale Rider and Once Were Warriors. So a couple of really, really great films. Let's see.
I have stuff whenever you're ready.
Okay.
So this is actually the 10th and final film with John Cusack and his sidekick, Jeremy Piven. 10th and final film together.
Although it wasn't until, was it 2017 or 18 when he was accused of sexual harassment, Piven.
Piven was, but they fell out before then.
Oh, they had a falling out before that?
Oh, yeah. They had a falling out in 2007. So
what
not
happened?
That much longer after the film. It's alleged that Cusack did not take Piven's winning an Emmy well for Entourage. And Cusack's like, "I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. I'm happy for all my friends, like, regardless." So it sounds like it had been rocky for a while. 'Cause you just don't fall out like that. It sounds like it had been rocky, and like they were like childhood friends. They literally were on 10 movies together, going back to One Crazy Summer. So like pre-Say Anything.
Yeah, I think we talked about it on an earlier episode where Cusack studied at the acting school owned by Piven's parents.
Right. And so they had been friends for a really long time.
Yeah, since they were kids.
Yeah, and I'm sure the allegations did not help even remotely. If you know John Cusack or follow him on Twitter, you will know that he is a super big liberal, and he just wouldn't stand for any of that, any what's going on.
Right.
Now, Piven, because we're on the subject, and why not discuss it? So since he has been accused of sexual harassment by seven different women, allegedly he took a lie detector test for the first, I think, 4, right? And basically was like, "No, I didn't do this." But the lie detector administrator's name is redacted because, like, how would you put out their name, I guess? But, if you're taking the test, why wouldn't you ask permission? Anyway, so the lie detector's name, the tester's name is redacted, essentially.
Yeah.
So no one can really verify it, and lie detectors aren't 100% anyway. So he has always denied the allegations.
That's an interesting question. I wonder if actors, because they are often skilled at putting themselves in a certain frame of mind to play a character, if they would be better at defeating a lie detector than your average person. That's just conjecture, but I'm just wondering.
Oh, because they play multiple characters, so why not that be a character that they've convinced themselves of playing?
And because many actors I met while living in LA, and not all, I really don't want this to be a blanket statement, but a lot of them that I got to have a conversation with, what I realized about some of them was that they were very good at mimicking other people and mimicking human emotions, but they didn't really have a lot of their own personality. It was all borrowed from other things.
Well then, wow.
And that is not all of them. That really does not. There were some that are amazingly interesting people, very smart, intellectual, a great conversationalist, but some really didn't have much to themselves. They just play humans on television and movies.
Damn. Cold as ice.
Which leads credence to the lizard people theory.
But sacrifice our love. Wow.
Maybe I was just talking to,
Super
ones
cold.
who were in the Illuminati, but
super cold. And then so I'm not sure. We're not sure about the Jeremy Piven stuff. I mean, I don't know. 7 women. I don't know. I just want to move on from that.
Well,
I just want to move on from that. So yeah, this was the third John Grisham film for Gene Hackman. He'd been in The Firm and The Chamber prior to this. So he's a favorite.
No, I did think it was interesting. One of the early directing choices that might have been good was Alfonso Cuarón, who directed Y tu mamá también, and
Claro que
Gravity, and Harry Potter and Prisoner of Azkaban. I think he would have actually been a really good choice. Maybe it would have been a little tighter film had he been the director.
You sure have a lot to say for somebody who didn't like this film.
It hasn't all been complimentary.
Okay. Wow. So here's the section of the podcast that's a little bit different, right? For Crime Files versus regular You Haven't Seen What. And we just sort of talk about a couple of different notes in regards to what the movie is discussing. So there's this idea of a stealth juror where you lie to get on a case for personal reasons, whether or not it's just, you hate the person who they're prosecuting, or you just don't like the defendant in general. So in 2 cases, there's the Martha Stewart case and the Scott Peterson trial, that they basically fleshed out these stealth jurors. They felt like they had a couple of ringers in there and they fleshed them out. This also brings up the whole idea of jury consultants. So essentially, jury consultants either have a master's or a PhD in behavioral science, sociology, poli-sci, criminology, or psychology. And really, they evaluate and prepare witnesses, they prepare visual aids, they go ahead and they are the point person in regards to voir dire, which is the questioning of a jury and the selection of the jury. They'll also do things like jury focus groups within that city to get an idea of what the local consensus is. So they'll do a lot of background investigation, not only on the actual city and get the climate temperature of what's going on, but they'll actually help prepare the defense and the defense strategy. So how that defendant should be perceived, or if you're on the prosecution side or the plaintiff side, how you want your plaintiff to be perceived or how you want the state to be perceived. Generally, you don't have consultants if you are, the state side or the federal side. It's really more you're doing it for the defendant, unless you're in a civil case, and then it's the plaintiff and the defendant. So there's that whole piece, but they'll go ahead and actually hold mock trials and things of that nature. And if you're interested more in regards to jury consultants, you can actually look at the American Society of Trial Consultants. They have a website. And watch Bull. I know it sounds so crazy and like that might actually be baloney because it's called Bull, but watch the TV show Bull. It'll give you a little bit more into what they do. They'll also prep witnesses, right? Because you want the witness to explain it in a way in which the jury's going to understand. So this is extremely helpful if you're having anything technical or scientific. You really just want the jury and not to fly over the jury's head. You want the jury to be engaged with your witness. So understanding what's going to get them engaged is extremely important. And your jury consultant can do that for you. And this all goes all the way back to 1972. I was the first jury consultants. And I thought that totally blew my mind when I found that out. Because I was like, really? We had jury consultants for so long? But yeah, it was 7 protesters of the Vietnam War in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So in their trial, they actually had social behaviorists come in and help.
Interesting, especially given what they were protesting.
Right. And then another thing that we sort of talk about in this movie, or how this movie talks about, is jury tampering. So attempting to influence a jury through means other than the evidence presented at court. So bribes, threats, etc. So we don't want to do. So there's a whole bunch of jury tampering in this movie, and so this movie is a good idea of what not to do. But also, if you're really interested in other jury movies in general, I would say watch 12 Angry Men, the original, 1957. There was a remake in 1997 that I've never watched.
And the jury chamber sequences seem to have been modeled after 12 Angry Men.
Right. And then there's a couple of other movies, according to Google, called Trial by Jury, The Juror, Suspect, A Civil Action, Jury Duty, and Justice for All. So those are other jury movies if you're so inclined to check that out. And that's all I have in terms of, I debated for a very long time whether or not to talk about, gun trials or to talk about the tobacco trials or large cases that have been. And I think, truthfully, the most relevant one is the one that I just discussed regarding the Sandy Hook shooting victims' families and Remington Arms. Because if that really goes through, we're going to see, that could possibly overturn federal law, which I don't even know how they're going to do that. So that's really the most poignant one to date that we should really be talking about, because that has the ability to impact current law. So, yeah.
Well, I had come across something interesting while researching this from the National Review, and it's an article by Jim Copeland called Fiction to Fact. But it is interesting because in it he's talking, and it was written in 2003, so around the time the film was out, and he was talking about the Aledo versus Glock case where the court ruled 2-1 that the gun manufacturer could be held liable for selling a firearm.
This is before the...
Yeah, because that was in 1999 when the shooting happened. Sorry, but the decision came out while this movie was still in theaters. So it's interesting how those two things aligned and, like you said, potentially led to that ruling that came a few years later about them not being able to be held liable. But what was interesting in it is that they mentioned that in so many of these movies, they always portray the prosecutors in these cases to be pursuing, truth and justice and trying to be the saviors of society. But he was also pointing out that often this is very much a Hollywood invention. The noble plaintiff's lawyers protecting the public from evil big business. And I guess he's talking about a book called Trial Lawyers, Inc., which he says sort of explains how often those lawyers are filling their pockets by just moving money from one side to the other and taking a huge cut in the middle. And so they're often not trying to actually necessarily help anyone either. They just want the money from the win that's going to be part of, this case. And so that's why they are taking them in many cases, not because they really believe in the cause. So I think that's something to keep in mind, in that a lot of these films, they're portrayed as the, upholders of justice and the saviors of society. And sometimes they are, but sometimes it's more for the money and recognition that's going to come out of it than really believing in the cause. And he references that a number of years later, John Grisham published King of Torts, which explores tort lawyers and the corruptness of that particular end of the legal system. So they have not made a film of that one. It might be hard to keep that one interesting.
Ridiculous. All right, soundtrack smashes. That's where we're at. The score was done by Christopher Young. He's done such scores like Hellraiser, Flowers in the Attic, Species, Set It Off, Rounders, Swordfish, the new Pet Sematary. So he's pretty prolific. Like I couldn't even, it's like 20 within each decade. Like I couldn't even keep up. There was just so many.
He's been busy. And they pay him. So there's that. I think my favorite track is probably Easter's Con. It's really a little bluesy, little New Orleans, little up to something. So I dig it. The soundtrack was fine. Again, none of the tracks really, really grabbed me, although I thought the main track, Runaway Jury, did help set the mood.
So isn't that really what a score is all about? It's not supposed to grab you. It's not supposed to detract from what's happening on the screen. It's just supposed to complement it in a wonderful way.
Well, yes, but you also, if you watch something like, the famous ones, like something like Star Wars or...
You're talking about setting the whole mood?
Well, those evoke not only a mood, but an entire experience. But
every soundtrack is not. That's not.
No, subtlety in a soundtrack is not a bad thing.
Right.
I think it's just that we've heard a lot of, even from John Grisham adaptations, that the soundtracks are often very similar. And they'll try and set the place like New Orleans often has a similar type of sound, or at least a southern city will have a certain type of a sound to it. Although, like I said, I thought the title track did a serviceable job of setting that mood and was interesting enough and somewhat different. Although from the unofficial soundtrack, which were songs that were not included, I liked Bitter Tree by David Berwald. I thought that's a great song. Forgiveness has never meant a damn to me.
Okay. I mean, it's your thing by the Isley Brothers. I don't care if it's been overplayed a gazillion times.
Every commercial.
I don't give a damn. Okay, we already had this argument before the podcast got recorded, but essentially, I was like, it's been in every commercial ever. I'm so tired of hearing that song. I hate that song. I'm like, how do you hate the Isley Brothers, Perry?
I don't hate the Isley Brothers. I hate how their song has been co-opted.
I mean, so many songs have been co-opted. Anyway, it's your thing, and that's my unofficial. Oh, you need love now, just as bad as I do. It's actually on Spotify currently. Digital copies go for $8.99 on Amazon, $18 for the CD, as well, roughly. So don't let anybody lie to you. You can get it if you want it. And I think that's all I have for soundtrack smashes.
All right. Well, one thing I did fail to mention that I said I would.
Fail to mention. Epic fail.
Was the real life connection back to the Madden game, where there was the Madden competition in Jacksonville. What was it, about a year ago, where one of the competitors lost and came back and shot several people. Yeah,
that's not really a connect. That's so loose. That's loosey goosey.
Yeah, but it's
that's
still
like loosey goosey. That's an IMDb trivia moment if I ever heard one. It was, wasn't it?
Yes, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perhaps.
So I did find a. Do you remember this line? I have it written down, but it seems like an alternate quote where it would have come from John Cusack, where it says, "Why are so many innocent people sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit? Because hungry, exhausted, sequestered juries tired of cold coffee, stale sandwiches, and no sleep will vote for any easy verdict just to go home." Do you remember if someone said that in there?
He might have actually said that. There's a point at which they're basically like, I don't really give a crap and I just want to go home because they've been sequestered. So that's possible. I don't remember if I remember that exact line.
But I thought that was a good quote that connected to just how frustrating it must be to be sequestered for that long, to the point where I'll put an innocent man in jail. I just want to go home. So, or I'll vote for whatever you tell me. I just need to get out of here.
Yeah, a lot of people do that. And then, it's sort of up to those in the room to kind of have that conversation. I mean, we had that conversation. We weren't sequestered. We were just there for like an entire week.
Wow.
And so we had to come back that Monday. So it was like a week and like a day or whatever to actually go ahead and give the verdict, I think. I think that's where we were.
Did you have some people that just wanted to quit?
I mean, I didn't let them quit. It was so long ago. It was so long ago, but I'm pretty sure that we asked for evidence again. And then I'm pretty sure that, well, it was a lot of things. The defense lawyer did not help his client out at all.
Oh.
No, public defenders are overworked. I mean, and in this instance, in terms of runaway jury, we're talking about a civil case, right? So it's different altogether. But and the one that I'm talking about was a criminal case, and public defenders are overworked. They're even more worked than state prosecutors. They just are. And I can say that. I worked at the state attorney's office in Miami when I was 14. And so they really generally, if you want to be a prosecutor, there's sometimes a different caliber. I'm not sure what it's like currently. I can only speak to what it was like at the time. And at the time, I feel like that probably wasn't that person's, umpteenth murder trial. I think that they were fairly new. So they're at a very big disadvantage. And while I know prosecutor land, you really have to work your way up to this. Like, you've done other trials before this.
Yeah.
You're just not going in there willy-nilly. So, and that was very apparent by the way they did voir dire, by the way that they carried themselves, like, you just name it. And the other poor guy just looked like he was just trying to get into the courtroom on time. So, yeah, it was a little bit one of those. So that aside, right, I mean, couldn't even enter in evidence correctly.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, there's like a specific way that you're supposed to do it in order to follow procedure within a courtroom, and I knew that because of law camp, yay. But yeah, he couldn't even do that. So I think that's the difficulty, is that I was like, oh no, this poor man is trying so hard and epically failing this defendant. So I hope, I don't know if there was stuff on appeal, like didn't object when they should have. It's really tough, as my 14-year-old self was hurting for him.
Remind me never to get accused of a crime where I have to be at a trial and have inept defense.
No. And it's a thing. Like, it's a real thing. A lot of people don't really know what it's supposed to look like or what it's supposed to be. So,
but shouldn't a lawyer know?
You are, okay. So here's the thing. You, like anything, okay, let's be real. It's like a plumber coming out of trade school and expected to solve the world's biggest plumbing issue ever. That's just not real. That's just not how that goes. So lawyers, okay, they go and they get their bachelor's degree, great. And then they go ahead and they get their JD, okay, great, 3 years. And they pass the bar, and then they're supposed to practice law. But guess what law school doesn't do? Unless you are in like all the mock trial extracurricular activities, like it does not truly, and even then, it does not truly prepare you for what it's like to be a lawyer. It does not really tell you how to write briefs. It doesn't do any of that, because really the paralegals are the ones that do all of those pieces. So while it might go ahead and give you the analytical skills to which you need in order to be a lawyer, it does not prep you for being in that courtroom. The only thing that preps you, like I said, is that mock trial, extracurricular activities, or actually being in a courtroom and epically failing over and over. And it's really a trial by fire, literally. So...
But shouldn't they at least teach you the basic plumbing, like repairing the pipes, so that you know how to object?
It depends on where you go and what you're doing. And like I said, if you have any mock trial experience or not, like there are reasons, there are things. I mean, not everybody who goes to law school was also a debater. It's very different. I mean, a lot of them are, but it's very different. So I felt for the poor man. And I also felt for the defendant in a way, because I just feel like this is all you could afford. And sometimes that's why the poor go to jail and the rich do not, because they can afford a better attorney. I'm looking at you, OJ. So there's that. There's that. There's that. And on that note, we probably should wrap up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although I have one quote that we talked about guns in America, but of course there was no way we were going to get into the heart of that debate, because you could do an entire 10-year podcast about that and never come to a resolution. No. But there is something that has always stuck in my head that I think defines gun culture in America. For me, it was a quote from the Colt Gun Company from it's post-Civil War. I don't know what year this first came out, but it is Abe Lincoln may have freed all men, but Sam Colt made them equal. And that was their sales tag for many years. And it's the idea that a gun will make you equal to everyone else. And I think that has sunk deeply into the American psyche and has been there from very early on.
But that's a lot of the argument regarding it, is that the bad men will have a gun, so you need to have a gun too if you're a good person.
Right. And again, that there are so many pieces to this, and I'm sure we will revisit this discussion.
I don't want to revisit this discussion.
I'm saying in future films that might deal with guns in law, but that is where we will end that conversation for this episode.
That's right. So please, I hope we've entertained you at least a little bit. I know it's not Clue where I'm saying dun 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 dun, dun all over the place and singing.
Maybe educated you a little bit too.
Yeah. So there's something about podcasts for everybody. So if you want a truly hysterical one, Clue might be your deal. If you want to think about our American justice system and how corrupt it can really be, this might be the movie for you. And then you never know what's coming up next, right? So on the next episode of you haven't seen what? True Crime Files. Yeah. So you never know what's coming up. So please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Check out our website at youhaven'tseenwhatmovie.com. Oh, where we'll also be posting, there are a couple of different interviews with Dustin Hoffman, Gene Hackman, Rachel Weisz that we'll be posting. So check those out too. Check out our social media, Insta, Facebook, Twitter at You Haven't Seen What Movie. And hey, write us. If you have any feedback, go for it. Don't give me the haterade mail. I mean, you can. If you feel the need to write it down and press send, that too is okay.
Yeah, send those to nra.com.
Just know that you might not get a response if you're not nice. Okay. That's my disclaimer. But other than that, like I said, check out the Crime Movie Database. That's also up. And you can check out youhaven'tseenwhatmovie.com for that info too. And that's actually an awesome in and of itself project that has been going on for years now, behind the scenes, to go ahead and actually be utilized as a tool within classrooms, but also, hey, you can use it as your own personal tool if you feel like you need to see every crime movie known to man.
I do.
I know you do. You are seeing them all.
Please fill that need.
Because now you're marrying me. You married me. So thanks so much for listening. And remember,
be kind.
Rewind. And here comes your esoteric question, because you always have to close out the show with an esoteric question.
So remember that time that we met John Cusack and we got a picture with them, but I mentioned gun violence to him right before they took the picture. And
it came out like crap.
Because he's frowning, you're frowning, I'm smiling.
We're all frowning because you couldn't keep your big mouth closed. You really couldn't. You had to bring up one of the most depressing things ever to thank him for being so conscious about everything. And literally, then he was just thinking about that in that moment. I can't.
But, interesting how it connects back to this film.
I'm done with you.
Don't tell me you hung your case on somebody's conscience.
I hung my case on my own conscience.